Hey everybody, we'll be starting in about a minute. Just want to remind everyone that you can watch directly through live stream if you're having any trouble watching through our site. And you can also join the chat through there if our chat room fills up. We'll see you in a few seconds here.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We're in week 3, and I'm glad you're here. If this is your first time here for this session, stick around because I'm going to try to go slowly with this session today. And you can always rewatch the previous sessions. But if you've been here for the last 2, then welcome back, and I'm glad you're here. And just want to start by reminding you a little bit about what we've covered before. We're going to use all the different elements that we've covered in the past 2 weeks today, and this is kind of a series that builds on top of each other. So session 1, session 2, session 3, and so forth really builds on the previous session. Nothing really complicated, but if you don't have all these steps together, then it might be a little overwhelming, and that's the problem with a lot of people. They don't want to do the effort to learn music theory because it seems very overwhelming. There's a lot of different blocks that you're taking to build that big knowledge of music theory. But if you take it step by step, which is what this course is about, then really it's not difficult at all. You can do it. Anybody can do it with a proper method. So what have we covered so far? We talked about intervals in the first 2 lessons, which is the measurement that we're using to measure the distance between 2 notes. And the reason we're doing that is that without intervals, there's no music. A note by itself is just a sound, and it's got to be put in relation to something else in order to have a meaning, an emotional meaning. And without emotions, there's no music, right? So if I just play a note, that's just a sound. Doesn't mean anything. But if I put that into context, that has a meaning. Whether it's a nice, pretty, appealing meaning or not, it still has a meaning. And there's a note can have multiple meanings depending on what it's put in relation to. I play the same note there and I change its meaning by changing its relationship to something else in the back. So that's what we've been covering in the first 2 sessions. And last week was an important one because we talked about different shapes that listed all the possible intervals. It's like a canvas, a blueprint that we're using in order to find all the possible intervals from the starting note, which is the root. It's from that note that we're measuring the distance of other notes. We always need a root in an interval, a starting point. And all the other intervals found between that root, which has a name, A, B, C sharp, a note name, and the same exact named note played higher on the fretboard. And it does a big circle, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so forth. Keeps going. So we used a shape that listed all the major intervals and the perfect intervals. So quick reminder, if you need it, every interval can be major or minor except for the 4th and the 5th, which are perfect. And again, if you're new today to this series, go back. You can watch the previous 2 sessions, and I'm going in depth with all those intervals. But that's just a reminder. And if you've followed us since the beginning, you should be all good. And we use different shapes because of the tuning of the guitar. The guitar is tuned in a particular way, which means that any time we have a musical element, whether it's a chord, a scale, or an interval, that uses strings 2 and 3 at the same time, the shape is changing a little bit. Oh, I dropped my pick. Here it is. So that's what we've been doing, okay? Today we're going to talk about chords. So we're going to get practical, and we're going to take a look at different chords, and we're going to analyze them, and we're going to see how these chords are built. And by the end of the session, you'll be able to take any chord, whether it's a chord that you find in a book or even a chord you make up, like just by putting your fingers on the fretboard. It's a very tensed chord, but you'll be able to analyze what's going on. And the reason we're going to go through this today is that this is the essential element that is going to help you find a scale to play over a chord. Chords and scales are really intimately linked, and you need to match the elements found in your chord with the elements found in your scale in order to create a musical piece that has a melodic appeal to people. You need to match the elements. And we went a little bit into that last week. I think I gave you a few examples where I played a chord and we looked at some of the intervals that we had in that chord. And if we had, let's say, a major third in the chord, the scale we would use would need to match the element found in that chord. In other words, if I have a major third in the chord, my scale needs to have a major third. I don't need to play that major third. I don't have to, but if I were to play a third, it would have to be major in order to match the chord I'm playing over. And that's all that there is to know about music theory. Music theory is just a puzzle where you're matching elements together. If you don't match elements together, of course it's allowed, but it's going to sound tensed. And tensed doesn't mean bad, but you just need to know that that's not going to be the most pleasing sound to most people out there. It's absolutely okay to do that, but you just need to know that that's going to create tension. And tension can be okay in music, because after tension, you get resolution, and that enhances the pleasure of the listener when someone is listening to something tensed, and then it's going back to something more stable. That's something that can be used too. It's a strategy that you can use in your writing too. But that's basically what's going on. So we're gonna start by just reminding ourselves a little bit about the shapes. If you need to, you can go to session 2 and take a look at the charts. But hopefully, by now you should have these shapes memorized. So we're gonna put it to the test. So grab a guitar. If you don't have a guitar, try to visualize the shapes in your mind, and we'll just do a little game here. We'll see if we land on the right note, on the same note. So the starting point, the root, is going to be on the low E string. That's the 6th string, the thick string, 5th fret, and that's going to be a starting point. And from that note, so in your mind, you should associate that with a shape already, the shape that starts on that low E string to find all the intervals. From that note, I want you to think or land on a major third. So you've got your shape, you follow the shape. It's a major interval, meaning that that major interval is embedded in the diagram that we learned last week already. You don't need to change it because the diagram lists all the major intervals and the perfect intervals. So that landing note, which is the major third of low E string 5th fret, which is an A, becomes the new root. And from that new note, I'd like you to play a minor 7th. So minor means that that interval is not embedded in the shape. You need to alter the major 7th to make it minor. So follow your shape. This time it's the shape that starts on a new string, the string where you find that major third. You're going to follow your shape until you find the major 7th and alter it to make it minor. And you should be right now playing the 3rd string, 4th fret. Now let's do that together. So we started on the low E string 5th fret right here. And I asked you to play the major third. So you're going to follow your shape. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. That note is a major third because the shape that you should have learned by now lists all the major intervals and the perfect intervals. So that note, 1, 2, 3, is on the 5th string, 4th fret. That's your new starting point. And from that note, I ask you a minor 7th. So you follow your shape, this time from the 5th string. Happens to be the same exact shape. I ask for a minor 7th. That minor interval is not embedded in the shape directly, so you need to follow your shape until you find the major 7th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Make it minor by 1 fret lower. And that's the 3rd string, 4th fret. And that's the landing note. So if you got that right, great. We're good to go. And we're just going to move on. And if this was a mystery to you, if you didn't really understand, everything is found in the first 2 sessions. So go back and just do your homework of memorizing these different shapes and you'll be good. But nothing too complex right now. Today we're going to apply that into a chord type of thing. And we're going to start with a basic, actually, before we do that, I want to remind you of the octave. The octave is an interval that we're gonna use extensively here. The octave is a very special interval. It's not major, it's not minor, we don't even call it perfect. It's just an octave. And what an octave is basically the distance between 2 notes that have the same exact name, but don't have the same pitch. So if you follow your shape that we had talked about last week, I'm going to consider the low E string 5th fret here. I follow my shape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 octa is 8, means 8 in Greek, I think. So 8 or Latin, I'm not sure. And these 2 notes, you see that they sound similar. They have the same function. These 2 notes happen to be A's. This is an A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A again. And if I play these 2 together, they almost blend together very, very well. It's kind of hard to distinguish both. They have the same exact function as opposed to something like this, where these have different functions. But this is just a repetition of the note. And we're going to use these octaves in order to facilitate the fingering that we're going to use. So sometimes some intervals might not be as clearly found. They might not fall into the shape, but if we use octaves, it's going to be easier. So we'll use a lot of octaves there. And also, remember that a note can be played on different strings, different frets sometimes, and that's going to be useful for fingering purposes too. So sometimes you might not find the minor 7th played within the shape. You might find it somewhere else, maybe here. Even though that's actually a very hard fingering, but same exact sound, right? So that might be useful too sometimes. So we're going to start with a standard bar chord. And we'll use an F, for example. That's the chord that people really struggle with when they start playing, especially if they start with an acoustic guitar. And if you know your F position, that's probably the first bar chord you learn. Let me check my tuning real quick. But we're going to use that F as a foundation to figure out what's going on with that F chord. So for those of you who are new to chords, who are really beginning, this is an F. I'm playing a bar here with my index all across the 1st fret. And I'm using my thumb in the back. My thumb is really in the back of the neck to have more pressure there. It's going to help me. And then I am, from the low E string to the high E string, I've got frets 1. That's with the bar. Fret 3, I'm using my ring finger here. Fret 3 with the pinky. Fret 2 with the middle finger. And 1, which is covered with the bar there. If I take that chord, I've got to consider a root from which I'm going to measure all the other intervals. And for that, I'm going to use the lowest note that I have, which happens to be the low E string, 6th string, 1st fret. So it's from that note that I'm going to measure all the other notes on my chord. And we're going to see what's going on. So if you've got a notepad or something to write things down, use it. That's going to be useful here. So we've got a root, and we'll call that R or 1, either way. That's our root, and that happens to be an F. So F is our root, so you can put a note of that. The next note that we hear is on the 5th string, 3rd fret. What kind of interval is that? So for that, we're going to use our shape, the shape that we learned last week. We're going to follow the shape from that F. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That note is exactly in the shape. And the shape lists the major intervals and the perfect intervals. Every interval can be major or minor except for the 4th and the 5th. And that happens to be a 5th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a perfect 5th. So we've got two elements found in that F major chord, and we know what they are. There's a root and a 5th. So if we had to start writing down a scale that would be useful to play over that F, I would pick a scale that has a root, F, same root, you've got to match the elements, and a perfect 5th. Those two together are going to be found in the perfect scale for that particular chord there. If I picked a scale that had, let's say, a diminished 5th instead of a perfect 5th, that's where it clashes. The perfect 5th, the diminished 5th. If I play this note on top of this one, if I play the sound of the diminished 5th over the sound of a perfect 5th, that's going to clash. As a matter of fact, I'll play it both together. It's going to sound like this. That's a cluster of notes there. They're very, very close. And you can even hear how tensed that is. Those two notes together are going to clash, and that's a good example. So the scale that I will have to use needs a root and a perfect 5th. Now, if you only played a solo with root and 5th, it's going to work. I dropped my pick again. I don't know what's going on with these picks, but all right. If you had a rhythm section that was playing something over that F, and you played a solo with the root and the 5th, which, by the way, you don't have to play them here. You can play them an octave higher. Okay, if you want to. It's still going to work. Both elements match well together. It's going to be a very boring solo because we need more notes in that scale in order to have more melodic options. But it's going to work, right? And I just repeated these two notes within octaves. Already a little bit more interesting, but we need more notes. So we've got a root and a 5th. Well, what about the 2nd, the 3rd, the 6th, the 7th? Well, let's continue analyzing our chord, and we'll see if we find some clues as to which of these missing intervals we have. And then we will organize them in order of appearance, root, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 6th, and so forth, and we'll see what happens. So right now we've got the root and the 5th. Let's see what the next note of the chord is. So this was our starting chord, that was an F. We've got the root, 5th. This note right here, which is on the 4th string, 3rd fret. Well, is that note found in the shape? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, and that's the octave. The octave has the same exact function than the note it's being octaved too, if that makes sense. So here we have the octave of the root, so that's just a root. We don't need to write down on our notepad that it's another root. One root is enough. Same exact notes, they're Fs, so that doesn't give us any other clues as to which scale to use. So we've got a root, a fifth, and another root. What about the next note? The next note is on the 3rd string, 2nd fret. Let's see what that note is. So for that, we could use the starting root that we had on the low E string, 1st fret, to analyze that. But you see that that note on the 3rd string is really far away from the original shape that covered 3 consecutive strings. So that's okay. We can use that octave that we found on the 4th string, 3rd fret, to start our position. And if you were there last week, you should know which position that corresponds to. So we're going to follow our position by counting the numbers, each note, and see if that note found in the chord is embedded in that position, in that shape. So let's see. So we're starting on the 4th string, 3rd fret. 1, 2, 3, and that's the note we want, actually. That's the note found in the chord. And that's 1, 2, 3, the 3rd note. And because that shape lists only the major intervals and the perfect intervals, the 3rd note is a major 3rd. Again, every interval can be major or minor except for the 4th and the 5th. So we've got a major 3rd in there. That's a clue as to which scale to use. That's a very important clue. We've got root, perfect 5th, root again, major 3rd. So we're going to have to use a major scale over that chord. And there's a lot of major scales, not just one. There's tons of major scales. As long as the 3rd is major, it's going to be a scale that is found in the major scale bucket. And there's a lot of scales on there. So we've got 3 notes, 3 important notes: the root, the 5th, and the 3rd, which is major. So you can write down on your notepad, what do we have? Root, perfect 5th, root again, major 3rd. Okay, now let's continue. What is the next note we have? The next one is on the 2nd string, 1st fret. So we're going to use the shape that starts on the 4th string again, and we're going to go up until we find that note. And if we don't, we're going to try to find the sound of that note. So let's see. That sounded familiar. And following my shape, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that note sounds exactly like the note we're trying to find there, if you're tuned correctly. And that means that they have the same functions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's another perfect 5th. So if I went into order of all the intervals that we have in our chord, we have root, perfect 5th, root again, major 3rd, perfect 5th. So we really have 3 notes, 3 intervals: root, perfect 5th, major 3rd. What's the last note we have? The last one is on the high E string, 1st fret. And that's easy. That's another F. That's a root. And a trick that you can do if you're tuned in standard tuning is to just look at your low E string. Any fret you'll find on your low E string has the same exact function as frets found on the high E string. They're both the same, just 2 octaves apart. So in this case, my chord started with the 1st fret here on the low E string, and it ends with the 1st fret on the 1st string. So these 2 notes are roots, separated 2 octaves apart, but the same exact function. So we took a chord, which was F. We know that it's F major, but if we did not know what it was, we would have a better idea by analyzing these intervals like we just did. And if we wrote down all the intervals that we had in order of appearance: root, perfect 5th, root, major 3rd, perfect 5th, root again, we eliminate all the doubles. So we just have root, perfect 5th, major 3rd. Then we reorganize them in order of appearance. So that's root, major third, perfect fifth. And that should tell you that chords don't need to follow the order of intervals. And that's what happened right there. And the reason why is that on guitar, especially on guitar, for fingering purposes, we sometimes need to reorganize those intervals. But as long as the intervals are there, it doesn't matter which order of appearance they happen to come. On a piano, it would be easier. It would be easier to play that root, major third, fifth. On the guitar, not that easy, and that's why we're kind of taking some liberties and moving intervals around. But the functions are exactly the same. And now if we wanted to find a scale, we would have a scale that has a root, the same root as the chord, F, a major third, and a perfect fifth. And you might ask, what about the second? It's not indicated by the chord. That's actually good news, because if an interval is not indicated in the chord, you get to pick which interval you want to use. So you could use a major second if you wanted over that chord. Or a minor second. It's got a different flavor, but both are valid options. So you could think of it this way. The more intervals are indicated in your chord, the less options you have as a lead player in terms of selecting a scale. The less intervals are found in your chord, the more options you have as a lead player as far as scale selections. So the easiest backing track to play over is a backing track with one note, just a bass note. I'm playing A. If I consider this my root, I can pick any other intervals. I could pick major intervals throughout. That would work. Or minor intervals. That would work too. I can basically play anything I want with just one note because all the other intervals are not indicated. And that reminds me, that was years ago actually, back when I think Chris Lippe, maybe the beginning of Chris Lippe's adventures on Jamplay. I remember there was a cool backing track that he submitted. I'm pretty sure it was called Play Anything, or Play Anything backing track. It's in the library of backing tracks on the website, and it was really cool because it was a cool arrangement with drums and bass, but there was just one note. And try to find it. It's on the site somewhere. It's Play Anything, Play Everything, something like that, by Chris Lippe. And you'll see that's perfect illustration. Just one note, you fill in all the other blanks. Now, if you were to improvise, and it's kind of a straightforward rock type of thing. Now, if you were to improvise over a chord progression with richer chords, found in jazzier progressions, very rich chords, you don't have many options as far as which scale to use. You've got to look at the intervals of those chords, and that'll give you an indication as to which scale to use. Before we move forward, should have started with that. At the end of this session, at the end of each session, there is time for you to ask questions that are either relevant to this or not. It doesn't matter. I'm here to help you. But if you have questions right now, before we move forward, don't hesitate. Write them, and I'll take your questions. I don't know if we have anything. Okay, cool. But yeah, feel free. And at the end, too, we'll have some time together to cover that. Okay. Now that we know that, now that we went through this example, I want to show you a diagram. We'll start with we'll see. You pick. Great, that one. So that's exactly what we did here. On the top diagram, you see that it's the same exact shape that we used on the first fret, but it's moved to the fifth fret. And anytime you have a chord that doesn't involve any open strings, you can move it around. And that's the perfect example here. And you see that happens to be an A major chord, because the root, which is the red note, is an A on the low E string fifth fret. the intervals listed are exactly the same. Root, fifth, root, major third, fifth, and root again. So you can play any scale that has a root, a major third, and a fifth. Now, let's take that top chord there. We'll start on A, just like it is in the diagram. And we'll make that major third minor. We're just going to drop that third string, fourth fret, to the fifth. Just one note changes. And that becomes a minor chord because the third becomes minor now. That's the only difference between both of those. Now let's look at richer chords, a little more complex chords. Let's take a look at the minor seventh, the one with the minor seventh. Great, perfect. So here, the top diagram that we have is a diagram with the root, fifth, root, minor third, perfect fifth, and root. That's a minor chord. And really, the only notes we have, even though we're playing 6 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the only intervals we have are root, a fifth, which is on the fifth string, and the third is on that third string. And that's what we have, right? For that top one. Now let's add to that a minor seventh. So that'll mean that there's less options as far as which scale to use, right? Because now we need to have a scale that has a minor seventh. And for that, we can just be creative. The way that it is listed here is basically drop the pinky, which was in the top diagram covering the root. We can drop it 2 frets below. That becomes a minor seventh. And you can see that if you followed your diagram that we learned last week, you'd follow it and you'd see that that's a minor seventh. And we can drop that root because we already have a root on the bass there, on the low E string. And what I did is add on the second string, 8th fret with the pinky, which is another minor seventh, an octave higher. We don't have to do that. I didn't have to play that minor seventh with the pinky. Without that pinky, it would be the same exact chord. Just sounds a little different, but same exact function. And over such a chord, we would have to, so we look at all the intervals found in the chord. In order of appearance, we have root, perfect fifth, minor seventh, which is also called flat 7 on that diagram, flat third or minor third, minor seventh again, and root. So we really have just 4 intervals reorganized in order of appearance. That's root, minor third, perfect fifth, minor seventh, and that's written on the diagram. And as far as a scale, I would need to have the same root, which is an A. The second is not indicated, so I could have a major second or a minor second. That would also work. I would have to have a minor third. The fourth is not indicated, so I could have a perfect fourth, a diminished fourth, or an augmented fourth. The fifth needs to be perfect because that's indicated. The sixth is not indicated, so I could have a minor sixth or a major sixth. And the seventh needs to be respected. It's a minor seventh. So that's where you can kind of explore. And if you have something to record yourself, you can record that chord. And over that, improvise by creating a scale that would work over that chord, as long as you follow the elements that are listed on the chord, the intervals. And that's really going to do wonders to your playing because it's going to give you a better sense of which scales you like. All the scales are going to work as long as you respect the intervals, but which ones you like the best, and that's where you can kind of develop your style that you want. All right, the last chord that I listed here is a variation of that. It's a minor chord with the root, minor third, perfect fifth, and a major seventh. And if we play that, that's how it sounds. It's an easy chord to play if you can do your bar here. So the bar is on the 5th fret, and then we're having the perfect 5th on the 5th string, 7th fret. The 7th is on the 4th string, 6th fret. That's a major 7th. You find that in your shape, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then we have a minor 3rd, a perfect 5th, and a root. So play that chord, and we're going to try something. We're going to try to add an additional note to that, and we'll see how that can work. We're going to add a major 2nd. So a major 2nd, several options to add that. A major 2nd is basically the 2nd interval that we have. It's found in our shape. If I take the low E string for the reference point, major 2nd is found on the low E string, 7th fret. But I can't really play it there because then that's going to cover the root, and I still want that root to be heard. Another option might be to use octaves. So if I take that root an octave higher, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's the octave. A major 2nd above, but that's going to cover the note that is on the 4th string, and that's the major 7th. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep that as it is. And instead of playing the major 2nd on the low E string or the 4th string, I'll play it on the high E string. That's the very top note. That's a root. I don't need to keep that root because I'm already playing it with the low E string. And I can play a major 2nd 2 frets higher, and my pinky is available to play that. And if you add that, you get a minor major 7 chord with an additional 2nd. And that's kind of the James Bond chord. Like that. But that's kind of how you can add extensions with creativity by not covering some important intervals that are already taken in your chord shape. I hope that makes sense. Feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. And we're going to move on to the major versions of these different chords. And there we go. So we're using as our basis that top diagram there, which is the original chord we started, that F major chord, but we're in A. That's kind of our canvas on which we're going to add some extensions, some other intervals. So that canvas has only root, major 3rd, perfect 5th. And from there we're going to add some 7s. So we'll start with by adding a major 7th. So the major 7th, if we follow our diagram, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, is found on the 4th string, 6th fret. That's a major 7th. Can we play this chord, which had root, major 3rd, perfect 5th, and add a major 7th? We can. It's listed on that second diagram, where instead of having from the low E string to the high E string root, 5th, root again, 3rd, 5th, root, we'll have root, 5th, and instead of having a root on the 4th string, we'll have our major 7th. We can because we already have a root on the low E string. So we're going to have to change a little bit our fingering. The bar remains the same. Instead of using our ring finger for the 5th, we're going to use our pinky on the 5th. Might be a little awkward first, but you get used to it really fast. Then we're going to use our middle finger for the major 7th, the ring for the major 3rd, and then the 5th and the root are covered with that bar chord. That's a major 7th chord. It's a major chord with an additional major 7th. It's a very beautiful chord. I'll just pause really quick because I feel that some people might be struggling with that position, and that's okay. The truth is, people rarely use that position. This is just to show you how to build those chords. But if you look at that diagram, that second one, the fifth string takes care of that fifth, and that's where the not comfortable feeling comes from, because that finger is weird, having that pinky there. But why do we need the pinky? We really don't, because that pinky is playing that fifth, and we hear that fifth on the second string also. So instead of bothering with that fifth here with the pinky, since the fifth is also heard on the second string, well, I can just not worry about the pinky at all and just remove it completely. And when I pick, I'll just make sure that I'm not strumming that fifth string. And that's all. And actually, when you're actually playing with a band, you don't even need to play the bass. You can just play the top, because the bass player is already playing that note. So I just wanted to point that out. You don't have to play the full complex diagram there. I feel that the more time you spend on the instrument, the easier it is, because you find shortcuts and you realize that, oh, I don't have to play all these notes. Like the bar chords, when I started playing, that was a real big struggle to play those bar chords. But nowadays, I rarely play that. I would just play the top maybe. And it sounds actually richer than having all these notes together. Just leave the bass player do its thing. And anyways, I just wanted to point that out for those of you who are beginning. Still try to play it, but realize that it's not that much of a big deal if you can't get it right, because in a few years you'll realize that you rarely use those full positions like that. Okay, the last diagram that I have here is also a major chord. So we're using that top one as a canvas. Again, that top one only lists root, major third, and perfect fifth. And we're going to add a minor seventh. So we have a minor seventh. If we follow our diagram, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a major seventh. Minor is 1 fret lower. So we have a minor seventh there. And we can add that to our chord shape by just lifting the pinky, which is taking care of the root, lift it up to free up that minor seventh. The third remains the same. And then just for fun, I added an extra minor seventh on the second string with my pinky. In this case, it's going to be on the 8th fret. You don't have to play that, because that minor seventh is already heard on the 4th string. These two chords have the same exact function. So as far as the application goes, if you had such a chord, you would list all your intervals and then fill in the blanks. Any interval that's not given, that's yours to kind of choose. And they each have their own different flavors. But that's where your liberty as a lead player comes. If an interval is not indicated, you choose. So that's basically how to build your chords. And what I'd like you to do as far as an exercise this week is to make up a simple chord. And a chord doesn't have to be pretty. A chord is just at least 2 notes played at the same time. I want you to play a simple 3-note chord. So place your fingers on 3 different notes on the fretboard, anywhere. Say this, for example. And I'm playing on strings 5, 4, 3, frets 7, 8, and 9. Consider your lowest note. In this case, it's the 5th string, 7th fret. And figure out what these intervals are. So that's my root. Follow the diagram. If the note you're playing in your chord is in the diagram, it's either a major interval or a perfect interval. If it's not, you've got to kind of find the closest interval. And In this case, it could be the perfect fourth or the perfect fifth, and find out how to call that interval. So this could be a diminished fifth or an augmented fourth. Either. You pick. Doesn't matter. And then do the same with the third note. That's an octave. So this chord that we played randomly on the fretboard is a chord with a root and a diminished fifth, or a root and an augmented fourth. And as far as the scales, you would have to pick a scale that has the same root. In this case, it's F sharp, and either a diminished fifth, and you fill all the other intervals, or an augmented fourth, and you fill all the other intervals. And that's why it's important to learn, as you're learning a new scale, to learn the intervals of that scale. That way you can automatically match chords like this one to scales that fit those criteria. In this case, I know, for example, that the Locrian mode is a mode that has a root. Every mode and scale, same thing, by the way. Every scale, every mode has a root and a diminished fifth, so that'll be a perfect candidate for this. So that's my backing track, and over it I could play a solo using the Locrian mode. That fits. Or the Lydian mode would be great too, because the Lydian has an augmented fourth, and that note can either be considered diminished fifth or augmented fourth. So if I play the Lydian, not the most beautiful chord, but that gives you an idea of how to use that. And for those of you who are able to record themselves, if you have GarageBand or Logic, or that's for Mac, I'm on Mac, but there's PC equivalents, just find a very simple drum groove, a drum loop, and add a bass, which is going to be, in this case, if that is our chord, that lowest note, which is F sharp, even lower if you want. With your keyboard, you could just record F sharps. Oops. Sorry, that was an E. And then add a guitar track with the rhythm of the chord. Once you have a loop going on like that, you try those scales that fit the criteria of and see what happens. So, yes, this was dissonant. It wasn't dissonant. It was melodic. I matched the intervals. Not the most beautiful chord, but that's just to give you an idea. I'm going to try another one really quick. Try this one. It's a lot prettier than that one. If I have a chord like that, and that's a good example because I was playing around guitar, that was a couple years ago, and I happened to place my fingers there, and I had this, and I thought, that's a really cool voicing. Not sure what to do over it, so I took the lowest note, I considered that my root, and then I analyzed all the other intervals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a minor 6, a minor 7, a minor third. And so I was able to extract from my chord those intervals and then match a scale to that by using the same intervals found in my chord. So root, minor 6th, minor 7th, minor 3rd, and create a melodic idea by using those intervals and filling in the blanks. And that's how you do it. Looks like we might have some questions.
Yep, we got a few here. First, real quick, I don't have this one in my form, but O. Gomez wanted to clarify on that first example you gave for the exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Was the lowest note F sharp or E?
It was E, sorry.
E, okay.
Yes.
Okay, here's one from Russell J. 1225. The James Bond minor 7 with a major second is also called a ninth, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And so really quick about those extensions. So we use the shape to determine all the intervals between a root and its octave. And octa 8. So 1, that's the root. That's then an interval. That's starting point. Got the 1, the root, the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, which has the same exact function as the 1, the root and the 8, same thing. And then after 8, we could call it 9, but because 8 and 1 have the same function, that 9 is also a second. But yes, the proper way of calling it would be 9 if we want to be technical. But just don't want to confuse people. The ninth and the second have the same exact function. Great question. Yeah.
Okay, from Southern Cash. I know we measure intervals from note to note. I got to thinking after the last class, if you plucked a D major 7 and then plucked, let's say, an F major 7, can we measure the distance between the two chords much like we do intervals?
Yeah, and that would be useful for bass players, definitely. But yes, you would do that. But in context of a guitar player who wants to figure out what to play over, let's say, two different chords, what you would do is analyze all the intervals found in the first chord according to a root. So, for example, if we had D major 7, you would measure all the intervals found in that D major 7 chord. And then you would measure all the intervals in that F major 7, but you would consider D as the root this time. You keep the same root. So you've got your F major 7 chord. You take all these notes and you measure them according to that D, and you will have a scale being drawn out to you. So that's the key. We're gonna talk about those in, I can't remember, but at some point in this session we're gonna talk about that. It might be the last one, modulation. But we're definitely gonna talk about that. But yes, you can measure the distance between two chords if you want, and that'll be mostly used for bass players. In terms of improvisation, finding the scales, there's a little bit more to it because we want to simplify the scale that we're going to use to play across multiple chords, and we'll cover that more in depth. But yes, you can do it with chords.
Okay, 1964 Mustang asks, any chord is a chord with two of the same notes always?
So I think I understand the question. Any chord is a chord with two of the same notes. So if we have a chord with two notes, but both of these notes are the same named notes, just an octave apart, for example, that's not really a chord. No. It's just a root that is being thickened by playing an octave higher. So it's not really a chord. So yeah, when I said that two notes together are always a chord, I guess not, because if it's the same exact note, same but different pitch, then it's not really a chord. You can't really analyze it. If you want to, if I didn't answer your question, feel free to clarify, and I'll make sure to answer.
Okay. Let's see, we have Rocker 816. If we find a random chord, how do we know the lowest note is the root and not some part of an inverted chord?
Yeah, that's a great question too. In the end, it doesn't matter what the root is, because the reason we're trying to find out the root is to measure the other intervals and get an idea of which scale to use. The root itself is used as a reference point to measure the other intervals, but regardless of which note you're considering the root, you're going to end up with the same scale. The scale might not start with the same note. Like instead of having A, B, C, D, E, F, G as a scale, you might have B, C, D, E, F, G, A, but it's the same exact notes. And it's not the note you're starting from that determines the key, but rather it's the interaction between the notes you're playing as a lead player and the backing track that establishes the key or the mood. So in the end, a chord could have multiple names, depending on which root or which note you determine to be the root. And that's subjective. In the end, it doesn't matter. It's going to change the way you listen to the song, but it doesn't matter. A chord could have multiple names. So don't worry about it.
Okay, Patrick 419, that A major 7 you were on, instead of muting the fifth like you did on the A string, do you not have the liberty to go ahead and play it as disbarred? A4, in other words.
Yeah, you definitely have that liberty if you want to. So I played an A major 7th, like this. Instead of muting that 5th string, like this, do I have the liberty to go ahead and play it as it is? A barred chord with that D right here. Is that, yeah, 5th fret, 5th string. Okay, well, no. Okay, no. Well, yes, you do have that liberty, but that's adding an extra element to the chord that is not purposely done there. Because if you're playing that 5th string, 5th fret, so if you're playing that major 7th chord and you drop the 5 to the 4, that 4, you're deciding that's a perfect 4th, but it might not be a perfect 4th. It might be an augmented 4th. You don't know. You've got to look at the next part of the song. Or if you're the writer and there's no 4th indicated, then yeah, you can do that. But I wouldn't add intervals if they're not indicated with a chord, because they might not be the intervals you think they are.
Okay, Jimmy talking, a common 7 chord like a C7 really uses the minor 7, right?
Yep, exactly. Yes. So it's a minor 7th, but it's not a minor chord though. A major chord can have minor intervals. What makes a chord major or minor is the 3rd always. Another name for a 7 chord or a C7 is dominant 7. The term dominant is a term that comes back in music a lot, whether we're talking about scales, chords, keys. Dominant means two things. In order to be dominant, a musical element needs to have a major 3rd and a minor 7th, which is the case here for C7. For those of you who are a little more advanced, the Mixolydian mode is a dominant mode because it has a major 3rd and a minor 7th. There's a lot of dominant modes. As long as it has a major 3rd and a minor 7th, it's dominant.
Okay, for the moment, we have just one more from Chubb.
Okay.
We talk about intervals between notes, but how can we know what we name a chord? What name of the chord we have as a result? Sorry.
Yeah. So that's a good question too. There are multiple ways of naming chords, unfortunately. So it doesn't really make it super easy. But in a nutshell, the letter that you're going to get in a chord is the root. That determines the root. So a C sharp, whatever's after, C sharp, minor 7th, major 9th, flat 13, whatever, C sharp is the root. It's from that note, that letter, that you're going to determine all the other intervals. Usually after that, after the main letter, you have the nature of the chord, and the nature is given by the 3rd. So if you have a minor 3rd, it's a minor chord, and that's indicated by a little m. after that. The little m applies to the third. If you don't have anything, it's just major. So if we go back to the previous question, we had a C7. So C is not followed by a little m. That means that it's a major chord. Usually after that, you have the 7 that is indicated. And if we're dealing with a minor 7th, that's where it becomes a little tricky. A minor 7th, you just put 7. You don't put little m7, you just put 7. 7 means minor. If it's a major 7th, you've got to indicate major, maj, M-A-J, 7. Gets a little tricky sometimes, those notations. But right now, that's all you need to know. 2 indications, the 3rd and the 7th. If the 3rd is major, you don't put anything. If the 3rd is minor, you put little m. If the 7th is minor, you don't put anything. If the 7th is major, you put maj. It's the opposite. So for the 3rd, you've got to indicate if it's minor. For the 7th, you've got to indicate if it's major. So in the case of C7, for example, C is the root. There's nothing after in terms of thirds, so it's a major 3rd. And there's just a 7. That means that it's a minor 7th. If we had a chord that is indicated with C, little m, 7. The C is the root. Little m means that it's a minor 3rd. 7, it's a minor 7th. If we had C, little m, maj 7, the C is the root. Little m means it's a minor 3rd, and it has a major 7th. And then after that, usually, sometimes in parenthesis, you would add all the other extensions. If nothing is indicated, it's either major or perfect. But that's a whole different topic too.
Okay, we've had a couple more come in here. Is the 6th note a minor?
It depends on the chord. Maybe this was referring to another chord. I don't know. Maybe it was referring to this chord that I played earlier. In that case, it is minor 6th. But a 6th can be major or minor. And if you use the diagram that we talked about last week, that's going to list all the major and the perfect intervals. The perfect intervals are only 4th and 5th. So the 6th can be major or minor. Depends on the chord. It could be 2 things.
Okay, from Jimmy Talkin. When I solo, I'm trying to target the chord changes but don't know what will be most compelling, the 3rd or 5th or whatever. Will you cover that?
We're not really gonna cover this in this series, but in I think a month and a half or so, we're starting a new series too on melodic soloing, and we will cover those things. But since you asked, I don't think that's the right approach. I get the idea. Yes, like targeting certain notes is good because that means that you understand that an interval is what gives a piece of music its appeal, its emotional appeal. But if you overthink it, if you think, all right, I am playing here, I'm going to target the major 7th. It's going to be too mathematical. And what you need to do is, just when you're playing with a minor pentatonic scale, for example, you kind of do that automatically with licks and whatnot. And the reason why people like the pentatonic scale is that it's easy to memorize. And that's what you should do. You should anticipate the sound of the notes you're playing without overly thinking in terms of intervals. Think more in terms of sounds. The intervals are useful to figure out which canvas you're going to use, which musical alphabet you can use, but then don't overthink it. But that being said, we will cover that in a course that's going to start in a month and a half or 2. I can't remember. A melodic for the next one will be about that.
Okay, we've got one more. I think we'll call this the last one. From Southern Cash, is a named half diminished chord the same as a named minor 7 flat 5?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Great question. And there's a lot of people think that half diminished means diminished, but it's not. Diminished is a step further. We haven't talked about that, but I'll answer it again since you asked. A seventh can be major or minor, right? And that's all as far as we're concerned. But that's not all. If you see diminished seventh, that's a step further. It's a minor seventh made diminished. So it's even further than that. So if you have a chord with a root, a flat five, a minor third, and diminished fifth, for example. I'm getting confused. Yeah, if we have this chord, for example, which is half diminished, we have a root, a diminished fifth, a minor seventh, and a minor third. If I make that minor seventh diminished, one fret below, that's a diminished chord. This is half diminished. This is diminished. If you did not ask the question, if you're not Southern Cash and you didn't get that, don't worry about it. Doesn't matter. But yeah. I think we're at the end of the session. Thanks so much for your questions. This week, I'd like you to just try that as an experiment to review everything. Find a few chords just by placing your fingers on the fretboard and ask yourself, what makes that chord? What intervals am I playing? And then try to go a step further by trying to find some scales that would match that chord that you played. And even if you're learning a song, or if you've got a song you already know, just find what makes the intervals of that song and just kind of review everything. And next week we'll continue, so make sure you watch the previous two sessions if you weren't there, and learn those shapes. And next week, same time, same place, and we'll continue just exploring music theory. Thanks so much. Have a great week, everyone.